To welcome Lindsay Allason-Jones. I'm sure to most of you, she really needs very little introduction. She's currently the president of the Royal Archaeological Institute for the second time. She also did the job 20 years ago. And a little bit before that, I'm also sure many of you will remember her from Time Team, amongst other things. I think that's the first time I certainly came across her. But she is, of course, a small finds specialist, which is exactly what she's going to be talking about this evening. And without stealing her thunder, I will pass over. So if you want to make a start, Lindsay.
And thank you very much indeed, Mike. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I should say before I start that what you're going to hear tonight was in the past a whole semester full of undergraduate lectures. So I may seem to be rushing ahead. At the end, feel free to ask any questions and I'll try and fill up any gaps if there's something that particularly interested you. Now, Roman roads, as roads of any other period, cut across landscapes either heading towards sites or bypassing them. All these sites, whether military or civilian, will produce finds. But the day we held in Berwick upon Tweed last year on the matter of the Devil's Causeway led to me being asked, is there a typical assemblage that one might expect to find on a fort or on a Romano-British settlement? The answer for those of you who don't like sitting through long lectures is no, there isn't. It was a site at Shipton Thorpe in Yorkshire that made me give this serious consideration back in the 2000s. The excavations by Martin Millett produced an ambiguous roadside building with few clues as to what it might have been, so a hope was expressed that the finds might help to identify its use. Sadly, they just made the situation more confused, to the extent that as an assemblage, it could be compared with a material which might be expected from a fort on Hadrian's Wall. True, there were no weapons, but the average fort on Hadrian's Wall also produces few weapons, and there are none from some excavations. The site at Shipton Thorpe has produced a button and loop fastener. I should point out that I'll be using a mixture of photographs and drawings all the way through this. Sometimes these things don't look particularly good in a photograph. So this is from Shipton Thorpe, which also produced a bronze turret, a bronze harness pendant, a bone bridle piece or toggle, and the heel plate of an iron spur, although the latter may be medieval. There wasn't enough of it surviving, to be sure. There is also an iron reaping hook, keys, knives, bracelets, brooches, and a splendid knife with a fine handle in the shape of a crouching lion. Even the dating was mixed, as this bone toggle might be Iron Age rather than early Roman. Now, if this assemblage had come from an excavation of a site on Hadrian's Wall, it would have passed without remark. With a building in rural Yorkshire, right next to a Roman road, however, the situation is different. Is this a military building, a purely civilian building, which just happens to have a few objects which the average soldier would not have scorned? Or does its roadside location suggest a civilian building with military customers, an inn or a mansio, for example? Now, this pondering about military versus civilian is not new. It was at the 4th Roman Military Equipment Conference held in Newcastle upon Tyne in 1986 that I reviewed the assemblages of small finds found in the turrets on Hadrian's Wall. This work had been inspired by a line in an excavation report considered to be accurate at the time of its publication about, and I quote, fragments of millstone, coarse pottery, some Samian, broken glass, animal bones and horn, being, according to the writer, the normal range of finds from a turret. The results of my survey, which were published in the proceedings of the Romet conference, made it clear that whilst there were far more objects found in turrets than had been previously realised, there was no typical turret assemblage. Although I did notice some unexpected geographical groupings, by which I mean that some adjacent turrets seem to produce similar objects, an observation that may have implications for our understanding of which fort supplied troops to which turrets. What was particularly interesting, however, was the discovery of a wide selection of artifacts which would traditionally have been considered civilian, even female in nature. This was despite the fact that the turrets had purely military histories, none being used for squatter occupation until the post-Roman period. Needles, nail cleaners, and tweezers, are unlikely to be recognised as evidence for a Roman military presence, yet several examples have been found in contexts which are solely military. Modern soldiers expect to have to repair their own clothes, keep their nails clean, and remove splinters from their own fingers. Indeed, a British recruit during the Second World War was given a small sewing kit known as a housewife with the rest of his military issue. So why is there a reluctance to accept these objects as military equipment? The answer is, of course, because they are ambiguous. With pieces of armour, it is easy to feel reasonably confident that they are military. If a body is found in full armour, there is some justification in the assumption that the deceased had been a soldier, or possibly gone to a fancy dress party, but I think most likely to be a soldier at the period. But what if he had been from one of the later auxiliary units who do not seem to have required lots of trappings? And what would be concluded if the soldier had died when off duty, when he was just in a tunic, belt and sandals? Certainly, cemetery excavations at Petty Knowes in Northumberland have shown that the soldiers at their outpost fort of High Rochester were cremated whilst dressed only in their tunic and boots, and their remains were buried without grave goods, other than the occasional coin for chairman's fee across the River Styx. And I should point out here that armour and weapons would have been recycled. So it's only in exceptional circumstances, such as at Pompeii or the tunnel collapse at Dura Europos, that a soldier's body is likely to be found in an armour with his weapons. On the whole, they were stripped of those things before burial. There are some groups of objects which have been claimed as military on minimal grounds. Brooches are a good example. It took some years before many archaeologists would accept that soldiers might have worn brooches. But once that had been accepted, great efforts were made to identify which brooches were military and which civilian. There have also been several attempts to assign brooches to gender, and all have failed miserably. It has certainly proved impossible to decide in all cases which are civilian and which military. Knee brooches, for example, have often been referred to as a military type. Yet there are plenty of examples which come from towns and villas, even a few from female graves. An example of an enamelled plate brooch from turret 18B has exact parallels from civilian contexts at Canterbury and Nath Park in Lincolnshire, as well as the military contexts of South Shields and Wallsend forts. Now, is this because some soldiers took their military brooches into retirement with them, or had the Hadrian's Wall brooches been brought into the army from their previous civilian lives by recruits? Or is it simply because people, whether soldier or civilian, buy the brooches which most attract them? Even large crossbow brooches have been used on occasions as indicators of German mercenaries or civil service officials. Yet there is an elaborate gold example, which this drawing doesn't really do justice to, which was found in association with female jewellery from the Winsell in Cheshire. It was found with earrings and necklaces. Handles are equally ambiguous. Here we have a facsimile of an italic H helmet, and you'll notice that it has at the back a handle, so it can be carried. The same basic design is used in several contexts, and there is little, if any, difference between helmet handles and furniture handles, each being sized to be comfortable for a hand to grasp it and pull or carry. Soldiers had furniture as well as helmets. Indeed, the fort of Elginhof in Scotland, which was only occupied for about 10 years between 78 and 86 AD, produced an extraordinary selection of luxury goods, including furniture fittings. These men were not camping in deliberate discomfort. They did not know that they were only going to be Elginhof for 10 years. And even if they had done, 10 years is a long time in an individual soldier's life. They would want to make themselves as comfortable as possible. Soldiers throughout history have been known for this skill, settling in cosily in the most unpromising circumstances. And I particularly love this photograph of a trench during the First World War, where home comforts have certainly been brought in. Now, the officers whose 3-year posting may have been an unavoidable stage in a political career would bring with them the luxuries they knew they personally could not live without, with the result that the assemblage includes a lead candelabra in the form of a small boy. It stands about 2 inches high, and a very large Minerva head, which is about the same size. It looks as if it's had a hard life, this Minerva head, but it has been magnificent in its time. And this would have been a couch decoration. Now, you would look in vain for these under the heading of military equipment, yet they form part of the assemblage of a frontline Roman fort. Forts tend to produce unequivocal evidence by way of inscriptions to prove the presence of the Roman military. But if the inscriptions were removed and the rest of the finds presented without any clue as to where they were found, it would not be immediately obvious that they had anything to do with the Roman army. This inscription came from Hadrian's Wall, and you might think it came from a fort, but actually it came from Newburn, which is just off the side of Hadrian's Wall. The inscription is of the 20th Legion, Valeria Victrix, and it mentions the 4th cohort and the centuries of two chaps called Liburnius Fronto and Terentius Magnus. Equally, if all the traditionally military equipment found in the turrets on Hadrian's Wall were added together, the resulting list would include 8 spearheads, 2 shield bosses, 1 arrowhead, 2 ballista balls, and 3 chapes. This is not a great deal of evidence for the military nature of a barrier 80 Roman miles long, which was the northwest frontier of an empire for many generations. Some turrets produced nothing which could be considered even vaguely military. Excavated in isolation, without the clue of provenance, the majority of these turrets might have been identified as small dwellings, as indeed they were. Small groups of soldiers lived and worked in these buildings. A soldier's life was not totally made up of battles. Some soldiers on Hadrian's Wall or the German limes may never have seen action in the whole of their 25 years of military life. They would still have regarded themselves as soldiers, they were certainly paid to be soldiers, and they left behind them evidence of their existence. But the military nature of this evidence is not always clear. Even the notion that soldiers had off-duty time needs to be accepted more fully, as should the fact that most forts had roads running through them in all directions, and a wide range of civilians would either have been passing through, scattering their belongings, or would have had business inside the fort. Finally, and this may be seen as a contradiction to what has been said previously, it should be accepted that all the objects found in a fort had a military association, in that they were used by soldiers or by people attached to soldiers in some way, however loosely. In other words, the soldiers of the Roman army, whether legionaries or auxiliaries, were human beings whose interests extended beyond the purely military to include games, jewelry, drinking, eating, and life in general. And the artifacts they left behind them reflect these wider interests of wine, women, and song. I haven't discussed the mile castles on Hadrian's Wall because not many of these have been excavated to any major degree, and those that have, like sewing shields, have proved to be very individual in their finds assemblages, largely due to their individual histories. Sewing shields, for example, changed from being a typical mile castle to being a metalworking factory at some stage. Poltros Burn was hammered by having a railway cut through it. This is for the train spotters amongst you. Caulfields is unlikely to have been occupied much, given its very remarkable internal slope. I've always thought that anyone sleeping here would have been well advised to tie themselves to their beds. Now, we have taken a quick look at the assemblages and forts and turrets, but what about roads? The Roman military needed roads, not just to facilitate military advances, but to transport people and goods. People have a tendency to drop things when travelling. All you've got to do is go down a motorway and see a remarkable collection of shoes and such like. And whilst most Roman roads don't produce huge quantities of finds, it is noticeable that when there are finds, they are more often than not at river crossings. Often these finds are cavalry attachments, as have been found at Berwickton up on the Devil's Causeway, and I thank Bill Blythe for these photographs. Now, this is hardly surprising. This is a turret, I should point out, not a very nice turret, it's dropped a lot of bits, but it is a turret. You also get pendants, and this is hardly surprising because pendants, for example, are subject to stresses and strains as a horse jogs along, and they will drop off as the leather straps holding them in place break. Thus, one might conclude that if you find horse accoutrements and little else, you are on a Roman road. But field walking at Berwickton has also produced 2 lead steelyard weights, one here, which I am unable to explain the presence of unless they were dropped by a passing merchant. Although it is likely that other travellers picked up any dropped artefacts or they were washed into the side ditches, I find it curious how little is found on Roman roads, which indicates the military and supply carts using them. One of the Vindelander letters reveals unexpected details relating to supply and demand at a frontier fort, and I quote, "Metto to his advectus, very many greetings. I have sent you wooden materials to the agency of Sacco." He then goes on to list hubs, cart axles, including one turned on a lathe, wheel spokes, planks for a bed, seats, boards and benches, as well as 6 goatskins. Now, these items seem to include rather basic essentials for any fort that needed carts, and it may be a given that all forts needed carts. Carts, like cars, need maintenance, particularly in the light of the letter from Octavius to Candidus, in which he complains about the bad roads around Catterick, where many of the supplies for the frontier seem to have come from. And there must have been a constant need for wheel spokes, axles, and hubs. These items are made from wood, and it might have been presumed before the discovery of this letter that enough wood would have been procurable in the immediate neighbourhood. Either wood was in short supply in the area, the resources of the local woods and forests having been used up during the building of Vindelander, or the type of timber available locally was not suitable for items like axles, which take a great deal of strain. Or there may have been an approved centre which supplied these items to the Roman army in the north. Given that each fort would also have had someone capable of smithing iron, it is another curiosity that in letter 310, Crautius asked Veldius if he would ask Virilus to send him the pair of shears he promised him. These letters indicate that Roman forts were not as self-sufficient as the literary writers have implied, and even objects which have been found on Hadrian's Wall, and which might reasonably have been supposed to have been made on site or brought from another site as personal properties by their users, were actually being traded some distances. Now, not all of these artifacts, if lost en route, would have survived the archaeological processes well enough for us to find. But if the roads around Catterick were as bad as was reported, then there must have been accidents in which the contents of the carts were flung into the neighbouring ditches or fields. Sadly, no artifactual evidence of a motorway pileup have yet been found. As some of you will know, I have become a little obsessed recently as to how Roman roads crossed rivers. The Romans seem to have been very careless when passing over bridges, where they deliberately threw in artifacts as offering to the gods when crossing a bridge, as at Piercebridge, or just managed to drop things as they walked or rode over. Almost all rivers crossed by a Roman bridge will have more than their fair share of artifacts near their bridge piles, even if the site at Piercebridge in County Durham is an extreme example of this phenomenon. Several Roman brooches have been found in Northumberland on the route of ancient trackways, one example being a small knee brooch found at Weldon Bridge close to the crossing of the River Coquet by the Devil's Causeway. It is possible that this object adds to the evidence for a side road running along the Coquet Valley to link up the road which ran from the fort at Low Learchild to Deer Street, but you can't postulate a whole road on the strength of one small brooch. The brooch itself is made of copper olle and was found in 1995 by a field walker. It measures 30 millimeters in length and has been tinned or silver. The bow narrows below the knee before flaring to an abrupt foot and is angular and of rectangular section, a form more common on the continent than in Britain. The tubular spring case has lost most of its surface, but may have had an incised line across both terminals. I think you can just see that there and there. Nothing of the catch plate survives. You can see nothing there. There are traces of rust within the case, which suggests that the spring and or pin were made of iron. At the back of the knee, there's a small step, which helps us to date it between the mid-2nd and the 3rd centuries AD. As I mentioned earlier, knee brooches are generally regarded as being particularly linked to the military. However, exclusive military use has not been proved, so it is not possible to state whether this brooch was lost by a soldier or a civilian, or even if it was lost by a man or a woman. The large number of brooches found in the military zone, however, suggests that they were easily lost. The lack of a catch plate on this example may indicate a flaw that led to the brooch becoming loose, or the catch plate may have been damaged as it fell. When it comes to Roman religious sites in Britain, then this is a site category where there really is no norm. Each deity was worshipped in a different way, once you get past the use of stone altars. Some deities were expected to appreciate cash donations. The assemblages of several excavated temples, such as Coventina's Well, include thousands of coins, whilst other temples, including Coventina's Well, include trinkets such as brooches and finger rings. The idea being that worshippers threw in small artifacts that they could afford, and which they thought might persuade the deity to support them in their cause. This is a wonderful page from the Illustrated London News, the November the 15th, 1876. And you can see the sort of stuff that came out of the well. There were over 16,000 coins of various denominations. There were finger rings and all sorts of other trinkets. There's a brooch here. The site attracted much attention at the time it was excavated, and nice people used to come out to view the site and watch people digging. However, some lead miners from up in the hills heard about all the coins and came down one night and stole a whole load of them. So a policeman was given the job of guarding the site. And here you can see this just over there. There is the policeman with a very boring job of watching a hole. Those temples which doubled as curative spas, such as the temple to Sunus Minerva at Bath and the shrine at Ely, offer up ex votos, like this one to Cercidius from Bewcastle, or lead curses. And here is a curled up lead curse as it would have been thrown into the well. Others, such as the deity Faunus, for some reason seem to have got excited by spoons, although the spoons with Faunus's name on them from Thetford, you can see here, were found in a hoard, not in a temple. Some temples, when excavated, such as that of Antenikiticus at Benwell on the outskirts of Newcastle, have no small finds at all, either because their deity's worship did not include making offerings, or because the congregation kept the temple clean and tidy. Basically, if a temple is to offer archaeologists any small finds to work with, then the rites associated with the deity worshipped at that shrine must have involved making long-term offerings that did not rot in contexts which were not disturbed. We've now considered the main types of Roman sites in Britain, but what about the native population? During the 1960s and 1970s, many rural settlement sites were excavated in the north of England, mostly in Northumberland, largely by Professor George Joby of Newcastle University, in an attempt to reveal something of the native population living in the area in the early years of the Roman occupation. Whilst considerable evidence emerged of the architecture and layout of these settlements, and increasingly more about their agriculture and field systems, most of these sites produced minimal assemblages, usually consisting of fragments of pottery, pieces of quernstone, these two don't go together, they just happen to have been photographed together, and bits of broken glass bracelets. Now, this is what is known as a Joby assemblage, George having complained that all he ever got was a bit of a quern, a fragment of a glass bracelet, and a bit of poor quality pottery. This type of finds group probably does not reflect the normal domestic assemblage of the sites when occupied. No one could exist with these as their only material artifacts, and agricultural settlements would have needed tools. Work on plotting where on the sites these items are found has revealed that they are mostly from what could be described as liminal places, under door thresholds or at the terminals of the surrounding ditches. As a result, it is concluded that these represent ritual offerings made either when the inhabitants established the sites or left them, basically arriving or leaving presents for the deities. And I should say that I think they're more likely leaving presents because none of these things are ever found complete. It is very difficult to break a quern. And quite a number of the querns found on Joby sites at ditch ends are broken. Over the years, some artifacts, however, have been found which suggest there was a richer and more complicated material in the region than might be presumed from a Joby assemblage. The intaglio from Hartburn is a case in point. Hartburn is a twin-ditched enclosure which was first discovered by aerial photography in 1950. Initially identified as a Roman fortlet, a misidentification which appeared to be confirmed by the site's position approximately half a kilometre to the northwest of the Devil's Causeway. The enclosure proved on excavation to be a settlement site of the type common in Northumberland in the 1st and 2nd centuries AD. The two V-cut ditches formed two concentric enclosures, roughly square in shape with rounded corners, each enclosure having an entrance in its southern side. Only the inner ditch contained any finds, but these were confined to some animal bones and one sherd of undatable native pottery. The site was not conducive to accurate C14 dating, and with the calibration available at the time, offered central dates of either 40 BC or 60 AD. The ditches enclosed a palimpsest of at least 36 circular buildings set in a cobbled yard, the plan of which George Joby described as looking like the top of a dirty bar counter. The finds from the yard included further animal bone and several sherds from a Romano-British cooking vessel, one vessel, which could be dated to the 2nd century AD. The buildings themselves were built by 3 construction methods: structures using posts, timber buildings with uprights secured in trenches by packing stones, and stone-walled buildings without foundation trenches. George confirmed that, and I quote, "no unequivocal evidence could be found to substantiate a development from timber to stone buildings." At least one timber house, which is number 4, which there's the terminal, it goes up out of the slide and down, and there's the other terminal there. George said was almost certainly of Roman date and produced 2nd century pottery, whilst another house, number 20, which is here, that's one terminal, that's the other terminal there, produced hand-built pottery whose decoration suggested a date as early as the 6th century BC, so you've got a bit of spread there. It is therefore clear that the site was occupied for several centuries, although whether this occupation was continuous is not as obvious. George concluded that there had been a minimum of 12 replacement phases. The finds assemblage of the site as a whole included a number of bun-shaped rotary querns and cattle, sheep and horse bones, which is quite unusual in Northumberland because these acidic soils don't usually help with bones surviving. And this indicated that the settlement existed on a mixed agricultural regime. A sandstone bar mould with a valley on 2 faces was found, suggesting copper alloy was being cast on the site, although there are no clues as to what was being manufactured. It is, however, the glass artifacts that were found which link the site most conclusively to the Roman Empire. One was a small fragment of colourless glass with engraved line decoration that was too fragmentary to assign to a vessel type. As is common on such a settlement site, there was also a piece of a glass armlet of opaque khaki green glass decorated with yellow trails, which had an internal diameter of about 50 millimeters. The colour of this particular example is unusual, but its general form and design assign it to type 3. Glass armlets have generally been presumed to have been manufactured in northeast England or the lowlands of Scotland, although more recent research has shown that their distribution is not confined to either area. All of those found in northern England would appear to have been made from recycled Roman vessel glass, and thus could only be made once glass vessels had arrived to provide the raw material, implying that they post-date the arrival of Roman goods in the area, if not necessarily the Roman army. Whether they were produced by the Romans for sale to the locals, as postulated by the late Jenny Price, or by natives for sale to the Romans, is not a topic there is time to visit here, although their presence in ritual context on the native sites implies they had more importance in people's lives than had been previously realised. Now, I mentioned an intaglio, and unusually an orange glass intaglio was found on a clay surface to the east of house 31 and to the west of a hollowed yard. Let's see if I can find, 31 is down here, so it's not in the great melee, it's slightly to the side. The moulded scene, although it does look like a sucked wine gum when you see the actual thing in colour, shows Achilles dragging Hector's corpse around the walls of Troy. Here are the walls of Troy, complete with a minaret. Here are the horses galloping off in that direction. Here is Achilles, and this thing here is the body of Hector. The intaglio has been dated by Martin Hennig to the 1st century AD. Now, an intaglio is a peculiarly Roman phenomenon, linked to literacy, status, and family identity, and is thus an unusual object to find in a well-established native farmstead where literacy would have been rare and the use of seals unknown. The glass from which the intaglio was moulded is orange in colour, which is also unusual and suggests an import, whilst the classical story depicted must surely confirm that this was commissioned by someone with some classical learning, The story of Troy is unlikely to have been well known north of the line of Hadrian's Wall in the 1st or 2nd century AD. The Intaglios small size, it's only 13 by 10 millimeters, so it's about the size of my thumbnail, would require a very well-educated viewer with remarkably good eyesight for the scene to be instantly identified. Even today, it is best viewed by a magnifying glass or via blown-up photograph, as you see here. The conclusion must be that this item did not belong to an inhabitant of the settlement, but had been acquired from a soldier or merchant passing the settlement on the Devil's Causeway. How it was found and why it was kept are both open to conjecture. I should point out that the Joby assemblage is only typical for Northumberland and the borders. The further south one goes, the more mixed the assemblages become. In Cleveland, Thorpe Thewles produced this gold earring, as well as some other small items, all circular things that could roll into the corners. When the excavator asked how I would sum up the finds from the site, I suggested that whoever cleaned the buildings didn't sweep under the beds. Not far from Thorpe Thewles, there is the site of Ingleby Berwick, that, as well as producing a glass armlet of the usual Joby type, also produced these fragments of a very exotic imported glass vessel of 4th century date. Some sites appear to be native, but buck all the usual evidence by having no buildings, but producing coins. In March 2002, a hobby metal detectorist found 70 Roman bronze coins at Long Horsley in Northumberland. The 61 sestertii and 9 dupondi or asses ranged in date from the reign of Vespasian, AD 69 to 78, to the life of Faustina II, who died in AD 175, and formed a typical pattern of such coins in Roman Britain in the 1st and 2nd centuries AD. All of the coins were very worn. These are the 2 best ones. And they were barely recognizable as legal tender. Found with the coins was a bronze casting sprue, which is this bit here, which analysis proved to have been zinc-rich and similar in its metal to the coins, suggesting that the hoard was destined for recycling. A casting sprue is the metal that solidifies in the air holes of a mould when you're casting bronze. Sadly, as at Heartburn, nothing was found to indicate what was actually being made. Sestertii were used in Britain until about AD 270. This long circulation means that the discovery of worn Cistercian coin hoards is not unusual. And without the discovery of the sprue and its consequent analysis by Dr. Alistair Charles of Newcastle University, this hoard would have engendered little interest in numismatic circles. However, the date of the latest coins in the hoard and their extensive wear patterns suggests that it was deposited after the Antonine War was abandoned and the area was once again in barbarian territory. The fine spot of this hoard, the red dot marks the spot, 45 kilometres north of Hadrian's Wall, is also close to the Devil's Causeway, which you can see coming up past Heartburn, past the site and up to Low Learchild. There is no Roman military site in close proximity other than the actual road itself, and the nearest civilian settlement site known to date is at Smallburn, 3 kilometres to the southeast. It is possible that the discovery of the hoard may suggest a settlement in the vicinity that has not yet been found. Alternatively, it might be conjectured that the hoard was hidden by an itinerant metalworker with the intention of being recovered and utilised later. The presence of the sprue, with coins of comparable metal content, argues that the metalworking was being carried out in the immediate area. It would also suggest that the local population had little interest in coins as currency and saw them as merely a source of recyclable metal. Great Wittington is another site that seems to exist just to confuse us. In May 2007, a small purse group of 8 Roman coins was found by a hobby metal detectorist near the village. The find spot may be linked to one of the roads that led north from Haltonchester's fort. As you can see here, either the Devil's Causeway going that way or Deer Street going that way. The site of Great Wittington is round about there. Unfortunately, as you will know, intensive agriculture means that the exact route of neither roads is exactly clear in this location. Later assessment of the site indicated that the small group of coins had been distributed in a linear fashion by the insertion of a modern agricultural drain. Rob Collins, when reporting on the discovery, offered the opinion that this had been a purse group lost casually rather than a deliberate deposition. The group includes 5 coins of the House of Constantine, dated between AD 318 and 61, of which 2 are barbarous copies. The latest coin, however, is a Gloria Romanorum. Here's the coins. I think that one is the Gloria Romanorum issue of the House of Theodosius, and has 3 emperors on the reverse and can be dated to AD 406 to 8. This latter coin is only the second of its type to have been recorded from Britain. This coin was the most worn in the group, suggesting it had been in circulation for some years before the purse was lost. House of Theodosius issues of AD 388 to 402, which are the most commonly found Theodosian coins in the Hadrian's Wall area, are noticeable by their absence from this group. As Rob has pointed out, the accepted view is that bronze coins were not shipped in bulk to Britain after AD 402. This view is based on the limited number of post-402 coins that have been found in the province, almost all in the south of England, so the discovery of such a coin north of Hadrian's Wall is unusual. However, Rob's research has revealed an Urbs Roma Felix issue of Arcadius, AD 404 to 8, was found in the 19th century in a hoard of 31 copper alloy coins from Hedden on the Wall, not far away. Both finds indicate that there was still some connection between the eastern Mediterranean and the area around Hadrian's Wall and the south end of the Devil's Causeway at a later date than the traditional end date of Roman Britain, that is about 409 to 410 AD. Since the discovery of the coin hoard, a great number of pre-Roman artifacts have been found at Great Wittington, ranging from Mesolithic and Neolithic flints, some Bronze Age metalwork, and a few Iron Age artifacts, including this rather sad-looking Nauheim brooch. At the other side of the Romans, an Anglo-Saxon knife, a copper alloy strap end, and a buckle have been found, as well as a mix of dress accessories, domestic objects, and coins of medieval date. The largest assemblage is of Roman material. As well as many more coins, there are also a number of brooches covering most types known from the region. This is quite an unusual one with blue enamel. It's quite squat, and this also has lost its insets. There would have been glass or some other sort of insets in there. You also get military objects such as belt plates and buckles, as well as the guard from an early Roman sword, which is this thing here. I should point out, however, that this buckle suggests to me not an object which has been dropped because somebody was wearing it. This looks to me like a casting floor. The metal here has not been smoothed down since it came out of the mold, and this bit here wouldn't have allowed anything to work very well on it. So what that's doing there, I do not know. You also get religious items at Great Wittington, such as a miniature copper alloy axe and a paterae, and a likely Minerva head. I should point out that the buckle, as I said before, doesn't really qualify as an item of military equipment. Sadly, in spite of extensive geophysical survey all around Great Wittington, no indication of a site, never mind an identifiable sort of site, has been found. I can only conclude it was a sort of caravanserai where people gathered to wait permission to go through Hadrian's Wall, but which had no permanent buildings. This does not explain the pre- and post-Roman material, other than to possibly suggest that the road may have predated the Devil's Causeway and went on being used after the Romans left. The objects I have just described are only a few of the Roman artifacts that have been found north of Hadrian's Wall in association with the Devil's Causeway. The knee brooch from Weldon Bridge and the purse group from Great Wittington may indicate casual losses by Roman travellers venturing into barbarian territory, albeit, in the case of the purse group, at a period when the supply and use of copper alloy coins was becoming very restricted. Neither find can be used to suggest a general interest in Roman goods amongst the local population. The stone mould from Hartburn and the evidence of the Long Horsley coin hoard, however, indicate that the inhabitants of the native settlement sites in the 2nd century AD were making artifacts from copper alloy, and it is possible that at this time the local craftsmen only had access to copper alloy by recycling Roman artifacts, and it may be that this has actually been from a metalworking hoard. The Hartburn Intaglio, the sucked wine gum, which could have been recycled like the glass which went into making the glass bracelets, but whose small size made this hardly worthwhile, may have been picked up because it was simply pretty, although it may have been kept for future use as the decoration of a bronze object. Another category of finds, which confuses our ideas of what a typical assemblage of any site may be, consists of material that doesn't survive because it has been consumed. This includes foodstuffs, but also other commodities such as olive oil, which was used in oil lamps and as such burned away in use, or included in medicines that were rubbed on or taken internally. The evidence that can be gleaned from the objects found during excavation can reveal some fascinating insights into the lives of the people on the military Roman frontier, indeed from a whole province. But it is important to remember that all that can be recovered during excavation are those objects that can survive the archaeological process, and even then only that which has been deposited in unusual circumstances is likely to be found. The lack of finds from the average commanding officer's house in a fort can easily be explained by the fact that they would have had people to keep the place clean, and every few years, when there was a changeover in command, there would have been a comprehensive spring cleaning before the next family moved in, as has been shown by the throwing of the Vindelander writing tablets onto a bonfire. Even in the less tidy areas, such as barrack blocks, the survival of objects is limited. There would have been inspections every now and again, and you would have had to tidy up. Only occasionally, when the conditions are right, as at Carlisle and Vindelander, is there a glimpse of the organic artifacts that normally do not survive, but which must have been ubiquitous across the region. Written evidence is needed, as is afforded by the Vindelander writing tablets, to attest to all those artifacts that cannot be found, yet were ordered in quantity and assiduously listed by clerks. It was those objects and commodities that would have made life bearable for the soldiers and civilians who lived on a frontier. But if we think those people were careful to ensure that all they left behind would be identified by future archaeologists as being typical of the sites they were occupying, we are greatly mistaken. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lindsay. Can somebody allow me to turn my video on, please? There we go. Sorry about that. Right, thank you very much. It was absolutely fascinating talk. And the first questions are coming in now.
Right.
Yeah, we usually start with just one or two and then it accelerates. So just prepare yourself. Okay, the first one is from Bob. Has there been any underwater investigation, dredging, etc., that have yielded finds in the rivers on Roman roads?
There's been work at Piercebridge where divers have gone down, and I think more and more divers are going into rivers to find out what they can find. And there have, of course, been underwater investigations off the coast. Pudding Pan Rock, for example, produced a whole pile of Samian, which is obviously en route somewhere in Britain.
I often wish that there would be more examinations, to be honest, at river crossings. We might then not just get the finds, but more evidence of bridges and
yes,
the idea of hoards out of people's minds forever.
Yeah,
but anyway,
yeah,
that's
that would be good.
But I think everybody's aware of that particular bee in my bonnet. Anyway, next question from Glenys Goodwill.
Oh, hello,
Is it
Glenys.
possible for the brooches to be rank markings or medals for various reasons?
Well, that has been a theory for the big 4th century crossbow brooches, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of evidence of that. As I say, you get brooches which appear in just about every context, on villas, on settlement sites in the south of Britain, in forts. So they're coming from the same mold sometimes. So I don't think there would be anything of that sort of like that. You get phallera, which is hung on the armor of soldiers, and they're more like medals than anything else. They tend to often look like penannular brooches, but they are definitely different.
And of course, now I've said that we get flooded by questions, we're not getting any.
Sorry.
Sorry. No, I'm watching my email. So if there's something there, Dave, can you send it through fairly quickly? Because for some reason I can no longer bring up the chat on my machine anymore.
I've got one here. I can see it. Shall I just read out?
Yeah, please do.
From what you say, when looking at an assemblage found at river crossings such as Piercebridge, it is impossible to say if items come from the military, civilians, or locals. Yeah, quite frankly, that is a bit of a problem. And there's also, I mean, there's a problem with any bridge that you can't necessarily know where the objects are coming from in the water, whether they're coming from the fort next door, as at Piercebridge, or whether they've been washed in from a site further upstream. Or whether they have literally fallen off somebody as they've tripped over themselves going over the bridge. And there's I mean, Piercebridge Assemblage is enormous. And there are things in there which, you know, could be anything, could belong to actually anybody. I think trying to work out gender specifics in a hoard like that is probably not going to help you very much.
The sheer quantity of material that came out from Piercebridge does make you wonder what must be lurking in the depths in say somewhere like the Ouse in York. Although
yes, I think it depends on
that is a
yes, I think
challenge.
it rather depends, I think, on how much dredging's happened over the years.
Yeah.
It's some rivers got more dredged out than others.
No, we're still waiting.
Oh, I can wait a minute. Let me see, because I'm seeing the chat here. John Matthews has asked me what it was like to work at Time Team. My God, that's going back a bit. I just remember it's been good fun. Got pretty wet on some occasions.
It always looked like good fun.
Yeah, it was good fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then David S says, having seen the Intaglios shown, are the Intaglio finds at the bathhouse at Carlisle adding a lot to our knowledge of Intaglios? They're certainly very spectacular, and Martin Hennig has very quickly produced a small book on the subject of them. Frank Gecko's daughter has done the photography, and it's absolutely fantastic. I think one of the things I've really noticed about the Intaglios from Carlisle is one of them was the smallest intaglio I've ever seen in my life, and yet it was carved. It you know, you had to really look hard to see that it was carved, but it was absolutely tiny. So how they held it whilst they were doing the carving, I just do not know. It's quite extraordinary. Wonderful thing.
If anybody ever gets the chance to hear him talk about the making of intaglios, it's absolutely fascinating, actually, how they did it.
Yeah. Yes, because I mean they didn't have lenses or microscopes or anything.
No, not at all. As you say, they are almost microscopic, some of the details. It's quite incredible how they did it.
Well, I think the one from Heartburn is odd because it seems to have been molded. It's not been carved. It's been molded. The glass has been poured into a mold. But it was whoever carved the mold who had a really good eyesight, because it's, as you can see from having seen it blown up, it's remarkably detailed. There's a huge amount of detail in it, of the buildings, of the horses. You can still see the reins of the horses. It's quite the most extraordinary thing, especially to find it in the middle of Northumberland.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And I gather from that they're going to be excavating at Carlisle again this coming summer. Frank's managed to secure more funding. So
so I'm hoping he finds me more sculpture to play with.
Well, I gather that they're trying to take the road back, the section of road that they've got that we don't know is or where it's going. They're trying to take that back towards the modern road, the A7, to see if they can find a junction. That's what I was told, anyway. We do have some questions.
Yes, I saw. Do you want to read through which ones you want?
Susan Biddle, what proportion of finds along roads can be identified as relating to children?
Pass. I've absolutely no idea. I mean, on the whole, we don't have huge amounts of finds along roads.
No.
And I'm not sure how easy it necessarily is to identify what is relevant to a child unless it's a shoe. And I'm not sure how many shoes have been found along the course of a Roman road. Obviously, if somebody was doing this in 1,000 years' time, they'd find the motorways of Britain covered in them. But I can't. I mean, I'm not a shoe specialist, so I would hesitate to say. But I mean, on the whole, you don't get much which is obviously childlike, unless you get a toy. And even then, there's sometimes some debate as to whether some little models of animals are toys or religious symbols or something like that. But it's really that's quite hard. And I don't think I don't think anybody's ever put together a whole inventory of all the finds found along the Roman roads of Britain. So I can't do the statistics because I haven't got the data.
You are right. Finds on and road excavations are few and far between. You really don't get many.
You don't get much, no.
But that's the nature of the excavation type generally. We don't tend to be stripping long 100-meter long sections of road so we can examine the whole thing.
No.
A few meters across normally. So you're only looking at a tiny percentage of the whole length. So if there were a distribution of finds, say 1 every 10 meters, the chances are you miss it
quite easily. I think also if an object is dropped on a road, then it's quite likely that any passing traffic is going to squash it, or is going to send it into the ditches on either side, or somebody's going to pick it up.
Yes, the latter being certainly excavations that I do. It is Yorkshire after all. Anyway, moving on from Alison Spencer. Evening, Alison. Dodecahedrons seem to have been recently. Have you come across one? And do you for their function?
Oh yes, I have come across them. There was one from South Shields, which was in the South Shields published in the South Shields catalogue, and in that I also included a complete list of all the ones that I knew about at the time, which is about 40 odd. There was also another one from Newcastle upon Tyne excavations, which I published in the excavation report. And the lass who's doing the work on it at the moment on dodecahedrons is actually my student, so I do know quite a lot about them. I really am not sure what they were for. As those of you who read the Times will know, I have been quoted as saying that they are evidence of the human buggeration factor, which is basically the principle that human beings will always use artifacts for the purpose for which they were not intended. And you've got things like there's one dodecahedron that's got traces of wax inside. So everybody thought, oh, immediately there must be some sort of candlestick. But, given something like that, it's like Chianti bottles in the 70s. They all used as candlesticks, weren't they? So I'm still rather inclined to think of them as sort of the knobs on the end of some sort of ritual staffs or something like that. But there are almost as many ideas of what they're for as there are actual examples still extant in the world. And I'm not going to go through them all.
We are getting a few in now from Martin Dolmans.
Hello, Martin.
From the Netherlands, I'm guessing.
Yes.
Lots of finds from divings around the Roman Bridge. From I have to pronounce this. Cuijk, is it spelled Cuijk? Hoik. Well, there you go. I apologise. Including shoes and other items from clearing of the nearby fort.
Yes. Well, that wouldn't surprise me either. The Romans were great chuckers outer. They did like to, they had a clear up every now and again, and they weren't very careful about where they got rid of it. They just chucked it into a river, or they chucked it into a pond, or they chucked it into the ditches of the fort. It's finding that pile somewhere, which is always the problem. It is interesting, isn't it, how shoes seem to end up in rubbish tips in vast amounts. A lot of them would have been completely unrecyclable. They'd been worn down to nothing. Others, I'm quite surprised. They look perfectly okay to me. I would have thought somebody would have wanted them. But it's no, I'm interested to hear that they're finding things in the bridge there, around the bridge there, that I suspect most Roman bridges would have ended up with a lot of stuff around them, because even if it's just stuff that's come downstream, it would have got washed around bridges. Around bridge piles, you tend to get dips. It tends to the water scours out wells and gullies, and finds will just drop into those, I suspect. So I look forward to seeing the publication of that site. That'd be lovely.
from Steve Brooke, which, yes, your comments apparently reminded him that years ago he saw a diver in a tarn by Hadrian's Wall, and he wondered if he thought that they were making offerings, presumably looking for them. Is there any evidence of soldiers doing this and watery places along Hadrian's Wall?
I think if it was Caulfield's Quarry, the tarn that he was looking at, the police use that because it's incredibly deep, and the police use that for training their divers to rescue things from the bottom of rivers and find bodies and things. So I don't think he was making an offering, though they tend to chuck things in for the divers to find. So maybe if they don't find them, we will find them eventually. I don't know. Soldiers doing this, the Romans were very inclined to throw things into watery pools. The average soldier was incredibly superstitious, and the idea of chucking something in to a river or a well or a pond was just absolutely inbred in them. That's something they would do as an automatic thing, in the same way as we tend to chuck things into wishing wells. You know, there's the water course at the source of the Seine, for example, in France, is absolutely stuffed with stuff that was chucked in. And it's not always easy to be 100% sure how much is religious right, as in Coventine as well had a load of stuff chucked down it, or was superstition. There's a very sort of fine line between the two.
And of course, that practice carried on well beyond the Roman period, as Gary Bankhead's mammoth amount of finds from Durham have proved.
Yeah,
which I'm sure you're familiar with.
Yes, well, of course, there was an Archbishop of Canterbury who chucked things into the river.
That as well, yeah. That's a wonderful story for another day.
That is another story, yes.
I'm just going to skip one. Bev, I can see you've got your hand up. I'll get to you in a minute. From Jane Hambridge, who vaguely remembers somebody suggesting that if X number of finds came up in a certain sized area, then this would be evidence of settlement. I'm not sure how big X was. Lindsay's thoughts on this?
Well, I think I just draw your attention back to Great Wittington. I mean, certainly there's X there. I mean, it's a huge pile of stuff has come up from there. But we have not yet found any site. I mean, it's been surveyed until it's blue in the face, and nothing. There's no building has actually ever appeared, and it's scattered all over around the village. It's it's not in one particular spot, but it's definitely at Great Wittington, which is not a huge parish. But it also starts in the Mesolithic and goes on until quite recently. So I don't know what's going on there. But I think one could be fairly sure that one cannot be sure that a certain number of finds mean you've got to have a site there. There may be all sorts of other reasons for stuff being where it is. But it's one of those mysteries of life until we come up with an answer, or somebody digs a hole and finds there is a perfectly good site at Great Wittington. There's probably a dirty great house on it or something like that. Well, I can't find it.
The responses from, I'm assuming it was magnetometry that
they've tried everything.
Right.
It was published in Archaeologia Israeliana. They have tried all sorts of things. The thing is, it's so scattered. There aren't really clumps. That if there was a site which is now built on, then somebody was standing on its roof chucking things in all directions with great aplomb, because it just doesn't come up with anything.
I was only asking because some of the soil types in that area are not conducive to magnetometry at all.
No, no.
Found that out from bitter experience.
Yeah, no. Just about every possibility has been tried, and it's interesting. You don't get pottery in much quantity either, and I'm more inclined to suggest that if you get an X amount of pottery, then you've got a sporting chance of there being a settlement or a pottery workshop. But Great Wittington doesn't produce a huge amount of pottery.
No. Interesting question from Susan Biddle again. Are any finds indicating literacy, style or ink pots, found more in military sites? and a comment that all that bureaucracy should surely have left some signs.
Oh yes, yes,
Vindolanda.
yes. Well, Vinterlanders and Carlisle, lots of writing tablets from Carlisle, the cursed tablets down from Bath and Ewley, places like that. Yes, military sites do tend to produce more evidence of literacy than civilian sites. But that said, villas produce a lot, and villas produce mosaics and wall paintings that either have quotes from or refer to famous stories from the past that an educated Roman would know. So that suggests that they were very literate. Where you don't tend to find evidence of literacy is on this native settlement sites, if I can call them those. It takes a while before a site which has had circular buildings and used purely for agriculture develops into a Roman villa of the status that has some evidence of literacy. It seems to take quite a few generations before that happens, as far as I can see. But yeah, the military were inclined to write a lot. As David Breeze keeps telling me, the Romans kept everything in quadruplicate, so there had to be copies for everything. So yeah, there was a lot of writing going on in the average Roman fort. And of course, if you were a soldier, you weren't going to get promoted if you couldn't write, because you know, once you got out of being a squaddy, you needed to be able to read and write.
Absolutely. As I always say when this subject comes up, the vast quantity of material that there was at the time and the absolutely minuscule scraps that we've got left.
Oh yes,
which is so frustrating.
Yeah. Yes, and I think also, you know, when it comes to stone inscriptions, they don't go on for very long, and I think there must have been hundreds, thousands of wooden inscriptions which have just gone. There's one tiny scrap of a wooden inscription in Tully House Museum, but you don't often get bits like that, and that must have been more common than a stone one.
Yes, you think so. From Bob, I assume it's the same Bob we had before. Any evidence about apotropaic objects? I always struggle pronouncing that one. That's objects that thought to ward off evil, I think, isn't it, Lindsay?
Oh yes, oh yeah, we got a few of them. Yes. Again, not from native settlement sites that we recognise, unless the glass bracelet, which is always broken, is something about that is to ward off evil spirits or something. But yes, I mean, you get little bronze or gold phalluses. You get the Fika sign. Housestead produced a little stone egg of the sort that we would clutch when you were in childbirth to keep the evil spirits away from the child and get you through it. There's a fascinating, rather odd stone oval from Dickett Mead, which invokes all sorts of strange deities, not necessarily Roman deities, but deities from around the Roman world. And that was for childbirth as well. Oh, yeah, there's all sorts of things like that. Oh, I think we have to be very careful, though, that I'm not sure that we would necessarily always recognize what these things are for.
Yes.
You know, some of them are screamingly obvious, like the Dickett Mead one, or the little phalluses or things like that. But some of the other things may have been much loved because they would keep you safe, and we just don't recognize what these are.
Well, some things, sometimes objects are more unusual for that purpose. There's a tradition in the part of the world that I'm come from for planting sweet woodruff by doorways and gateways.
Oh, right,
do
right,
exactly
yes.
that job.
Yeah.
It's not a sort of plant you would think of in that way.
No. Well, and also the post-medieval habit of putting dead cats up chimneys and things like that.
Oh yes, yes, of course.
And shoes up chimneys, all sorts of things like that. If you just found the bones of a dead cat and a couple of shoes, you wouldn't necessarily think.
We still have a couple more from Allason-Jones. Any small finds from in the river and around the Roman bridges at Chesters and Willeford?
Not that I'm aware of. No. There may have been some found in previous years. I can't. I didn't see any of the finds that came from the excavations recently by Paul Bidwell on the north side of the river at Chester's. So I don't know if there was any in there. I should know, but I can't recall. No, I can't think of any. I think the thing with those rivers is at Chester's and at Wilford, the river can run very, very fast, and you get flood surges down them.
Yes.
And so that, scour it all out and dump it somewhere else. So, but I'm not aware of much in the way of small finds from those sites.
Penny was just asking, she missed it, the name of the site that had finds, but no actual site. I think, was it Great Wittington, wasn't it?
Great Wittington. Yes. Yes, it's just north of Holt and Chester's.
Yeah. Right now, we have a regular, one of our members, struggles with the technology sometimes, so we let him ask his question in person, but we always leave the last one. So at the moment, he's last.
Okay.
So Bev, if you want to turn your mic on, by all means, ask your question.
Thank you very much indeed, Mike, and hello, Alison, and thank you very much for all of that. Styluses. I was going to ask about styluses, but then somebody else has done so.
Right.
So I will merely say that in small towns, styluses, quite a number of styluses have been found, but I think that small towns were outside your remit for this particular talk, were they?
Yes, I didn't talk about finds from towns because towns are such a mixed bag, because you very often get military sites, you get very Roman sites, you get public buildings, and all of those will produce different sorts of finds. But the average town, whether small or large, will have its educated class, and it would have its civil service, its bureaucratic class. So yes, you would expect to find things like that in a town, but in a way, a town is a microcosm of all the other sites, because you will get local people, you'll get foreign people, you'll get military people, you'll get civilian people, you'll get posh people, you'll get poor people. They'll all be there, and they'll have their finds with them.
I very much take that, but I was particularly interested, though, in small towns. Much of what you're saying is really more applicable, I would suggest. I wouldn't know to larger towns, but anyway, we can't take that any further, I guess.
No, I think you'd be surprised how mixed small towns were, though.
Yes. Oh no, I'm not.
Yes, from the finds.
No, I'm not.
Yes.
Yeah. I know very well. Yes. Thank you.
Thanks, Bev. And I think that might actually be it. I'm not seeing anything else coming through. If there's one I've missed, Dave, please let me know quickly. No, I'm seeing nothing. But we are getting lots of thank yous on the chat.
Oh, that's very nice.
Yeah. And we had a good audience tonight, as we expected.
Yes.
So I think, unless there is anybody else, yes, I'm going to confirm that is it.